you look at that view. Welcome to Bennett's Bike Social. My name's Simon. Welcome to sunny Spain, and it really is sunny this time. And welcome to the launch of Yamaha's 2022 Ténéré 700 World Raid.
So here we are, first few miles trickling away in southern Spain, in Murcia. Beautiful day on Yamaha's 2022 Ténéré 700 World Raid. And as usual, I'll run through the spec of the bike. If you can hear me above this wind noise, I'll run through the spec of the bike and try and refrain from commenting too much on how it feels, because after all, we've only done 8.8 miles after leaving the hotel. So, let me whiz through, and first of all I'll tell you the things that are the same as the Ténéré 700. So the first thing the same is the engine. It's the same familiar parallel twin from the Ténéré 700, from the Trace 700, from the MT-07. Punches well above its weight. It's claimed to make 72 horsepower at 9,000 RPM and 50 foot-pound of torque at 6,000 RPM, or 6,500 RPM I should say. But it feels like it's, I don't know, it's almost an engine which you don't really worry about how much power it makes, because it's such a delightful thing to use. It's one of the best engines in production today, I would say. So there we go, so that's the engine, that's the same. The frame is the same as the Ténéré 700. Steering geometry is the same. The wheelbase is the same. The brakes are the same. The wheels are the same, spoke wheels, steel tube rims. And then after that, I mean, the broad styling is kind of the same as well. It's still got the quad headlamps, still got an unadjustable screen, still got this bar here. If I dip my head a bit, you might be able to hear me a bit more clearly. We're getting a bit of a boogie on here, which is really good. First thing in the morning, bit of a sharpener before we take the bike off-road, I guess. So let's talk about things that are different. Well, the most obvious thing is this 23-litre twin fuel tank over the over the 16-litre tank on the Ténéré 700. We have this Öhlins steering damper, bit of a strange choice, but I'll talk about that in a second. Other new things, we have this TFT dash with increased functionality. We have a USB port down here. We have slightly different sort of cockpit layout, I think. We have slightly different switchgear to cope with the functionality of the clocks. And then in terms of numbers, we have more weight. We have 220 kilos. Instead of the old bike's 204 kilos, and I'll talk about where that's come from, although it's fairly obvious. So we have wider foot pegs for better off-road ability. So that's the kind of the short list. Oh yeah, and the suspension, of course, has been stiffened up considerably over the old bike. So let's just have a quick sort of talk about the old machine. Supremely popular, lots of people bought them, the press loved them when they first came out. Everybody had slight niggles and concerns, and everybody, just about everyone who owns a Ténéré 700 has modified it in some way or another, which is really nice. I love the fact that people go out and personalise the bike and make it just right for them, and consequently we have people making the seat more comfortable, we have people adding lowering kits, we have people adding bar risers, we have certainly changes with the exhaust. One of the problems with the old Ténéré 700 was the welded on subframe, not bolted on, and then a supremely bendy exhaust mount, which meant that dropping the bike, even from standstill I think, onto the exhaust, could push the exhaust into the swing arm and nick the swing arm, or could even bend the subframe, which is a slightly more concerning issue. That hasn't changed. That's exactly the same as it was, that exhaust mounting. So I did ask Yamaha about this last night, and to be honest, the European engineers from Yamaha Motor Europe they didn't roll their eyes, but they definitely gave me the impression that it was something that they asked Japan to change, and Japan said, nope, This is the production bike. This is the production process. We've invested in, presumably they've tooled up to make the frame. They've obviously done the sums, and they have to keep making this frame until they've repaid the investment for making the jig. And they're not going to go start chopping it up and putting bolt-on subframes this early in the model life. So it stays the same. That is not what, just to be sure, that is not what was said to me. That was the implication. Basically, it's a production process issue. But in my head, that's what that actually means. Make of it what you will. Anyway, at least that gives us something to customise with our exhausts and our sort of, I don't know, there's been a few different options of tucking the exhaust in. Anyway, so let's get on to what Yamaha say they've done then. So let's talk about these twin 23-litre combined fuel tanks. So, twin filler caps, you have to fill them both up at standstill. Although the tanks will equalise when you're riding, you've got to fill them both up. Why have Yamaha decided to split a tank and have two? Because on the one hand, that does add some of that extra weight. I mean, obviously some of the extra weight comes from the extra fuel load, because that 220 kilos is a claimed wet figure. So about 6 or 7 kilos of that will be extra fuel. But then, you know, twin tanks do add extra mass. Now in terms of centre of gravity, Yamaha say it's almost, is the word they use, almost the same as the Ténéré 700. So that means it is a little bit higher. But they've gone to great lengths. I mean, this is part of the reason for fitting a twin fuel tank, really, is to keep the tank profile as flat and low as possible. So there is no fuel in this centre section, or at least not significantly high up. It all hangs down the side, including the fuel pump on one side. So they have kind of tried to keep the weight down, and splitting the tank, they say, helps with that process. They'll say it reduces the way the fuel sloshes about in a single tank. So it reduces the sort of the slosh effect. Hello, tractor. It's not Spain if you don't come across a tractor. So that's their rationale for the tank. And to be honest, I don't mind it. I mean, you know, it does change the tank profile and make there more space, and it's flatter here. It does mean you can't really use a tank bag, I suppose, if that's an issue. But, you know, I quite like the styling as well. There's a stylistic element to it, and it's quite unique in modern production. I don't think any other bike's got twin tanks quite like this, with twin filler caps. So, you know, I'm not that bothered about it. Öhlins steering damper is a bit of an interesting one. Yamaha say the weight, because of the tank, the weight balance of the bike has shifted slightly, and it's now 50-50. And they said their chassis engineers just felt that it should have a steering damper. Now, to be honest, I've never had a tank slapper on a Ténéré 700. I'm not even close to one. But some people have said they have ridden into potholes and found the bike flapping around a bit. So, I don't know, maybe there's a reason for it. Again, it's kind of adding extra weight in it with all the bracketry, and it looks quite trick, but I'm not sure how necessary it really is. And then we have the dash, which sees the introduction of, I think it's the introduction. I don't think Ténéré 7 has this little scroll wheel. It might have. Forgive me if it has. I can't remember. But here we have this MTO 9 style scrolling wheel, on which we can change the clock displays, which I'm not going to attempt to juggle around and show you now, because it is a fiddly little bugger to use. So hopefully we'll have some B-roll footage of the different clock displays. And there's a bit of Bluetooth connectivity for those that care about such things, but there still isn't any traction control or engine modes, which, again, a lot of Ténéré owners say is a good thing about the Ténéré. They like the fact that it's not as complicated. It hasn't got all the Africa Twin style buttons and functionalities, which is good. What else have we got? We've got our USB port, which is good. Suspension, let's talk about that. That's one thing that almost everybody complains about and modifies on their Ténéré 700. It's too soft. The back end, the front dives on the road on the forks. The back end bottoms out quite easily on the road and off-road. Everybody fits uprated springs and even uprates damping ratios and changes the valving. Yamaha have done that with this bike. So we have stiffer springs, we have more damping, we have a different linkage ratio at the back. We have more fork travel, 230mm up 20mm. We have more rear wheel travel, now up to 20mm, so that's another 20mm up, which means we have more ground clearance. And we also have more seat height, which is up 15 mil. So it's now 890 mil seat height instead of 875, which makes the bike a little bit more tippy toes. Yamaha also said they've changed the seat to adapt to the new tank. It's flatter. They say it's more comfortable. I'll tell you about that at the end of today when we've done 200 miles. But the bike doesn't feel noticeably more bulky. It's still light, it's still light, it's still no Africa Twin in its sort of mass. It still has that light flickability, as you can see. I'm just trying to keep up with the test rider here, and it's a fairly bumpy road. And so there we go, that's a really quick tour around what's changed. I've probably missed a few points, but I'll pick them up later on at the end. And I'll just have a quick run through the prices as well, because there's a few sticking points here. So, this bike costs £11,800. Yes. Now, the original Ténéré 700, when it first came out, was about 8,000, I think 8,399, which is a good price. It was one of its most attractive features, clearly. It was good value. The Ténéré 700 in 2022 cost £9,900. That's like an 18% increase in its price, which is quite hefty. So those people who still think the Ténéré 700 is kind of quite a cheap sort of bike, it's knocking on 10 grand. So this is 1,800 quid more than the standard Ténéré, and to be fair, it probably has 1,800 quid's worth of development and extra parts in it. But 11.8 is actually a 40% increase over the original Ténéré 700 price. And so if we have that kind of original price fixed in our heads, because that's what we paid for our Ténéré 700, and then we see the price tag of this thing at 11.8, that is a big gap to bridge. And it puts the world rate in the vicinity of some other bikes, notably Triumph's Tiger 900 Rally, the standard version without the semi-active springs. Now that comes with cruise control, this doesn't. It comes with heated grips, this doesn't. It comes with 888cc T-plane crank engine. It's got a bit more go in it than this thing. It's not as light and lithe. It has got traction control, so it is a more complex bike, but it's more bike, and it's only £12,100, which is a couple of hundred quid more than the world raid. So that starts to make the world raid a little bit less attractive, a bit salty. Now Yamaha say across Europe they hope to sell, well, of all the Ténérés they sell, they hope to sell a third. A third will be the world raid. I might venture to suggest that at that price that's a little bit optimistic, but I'm sure they know what they're doing with their pricing. So there we go. That's your Yamaha World Raid, a brief rundown of the spec. We're going to do a few more miles now on the road. We're going to do about 100 miles of off-road, which I'm hoping isn't too taxing, but taxing enough. And I'll come back to you with a verdict on how the day has gone and what I think of the World Raid later on.
Well, as always, and especially with Yamaha, that's been a pretty hectic, full-on day that had just about everything in it. I know I always say this, but it's always true of Yamaha. We had 100 miles of roads, and we had all kinds of roads. We had twisty tarmac that was clean. We had some very narrow, nadgery tarmac that was anything but clean. It was fairly dusty, sketchy, low on grip. We had potholes. We had some, not motorways, but we've had some faster stretches where the bike can stretch its legs a bit. And we've had about 100 miles of off-road. Mostly dry, dusty, kind of farm trails. stony trails, a lot of gravel, a few more gnarly riverbeddy bits, a bit of sand, a bit of everything really. Nothing wet, nothing muddy, nothing like the Peak District in winter. But, so I'll give you the top-down sort of spec of the World Raid. Let's talk a little bit about how it feels. And the first thing to say is that the suspension, the stiffer suspension is definitely noticeable, and the extra weight is definitely noticeable. Those two things together are sort of instantly like, right, okay, so that's different about this bike over the Ténéré 700. The extra weight, off-road, I suspect if you bought a Ténéré 700 to go green laning and you predominantly ride it off-road and you do a fair bit of that, then this bike probably might be a bit of a step up in terms of its weight. It is more challenging because it is heavier, it is more massive. The way the two tanks flare out definitely gives you a greater sense of mass. It hasn't got that same kind of lightweight, flickable, throw it about off-road feel that the Ténéré 700 has got. You definitely feel those extra kilos. And on the road, you definitely feel the better suspension. It's firmer but not stiffer, so it does exactly what it says on the tin. There isn't as much weight transfer front to rear. The bike, you can tell the bike is a bit more front end heavy. I mean, normally with these sort of 21-inch front sort of adventure bikes, what you can tend to do is sit on the back shock a bit, because they all tend to be a bit rear weight biased, and you sort of sit back and then fire it out of corners. So you go spindling your way in and then you kind of go firing your way out. Because the World Raid sits 50-50, it's a bit flatter. It doesn't instinctively make you want to sit on the rear shock and pin it going out. It has a little bit more of a sort of a floaty sensation, as if it's not particularly pinned on the front, it's not particularly pinned on the rear. So in its neutral state, it does tend to feel a little bit more, I don't know, level, as it were. So it is sort of stiffer at the front and it is stiffer at the back, so it hasn't got so much of that pitching. It's not quite so easy to sort of double check yourself when you're firing it into a roundabout, say. But on the whole, the suspension is an improvement. The tank range, we've done about 200 miles, and that's used about 4 bars, and it leaves about 2 bars left. Now, if you assume the tank has got a linear sort of drop to it, then that's kind of suggests that it's used 2/3 of a tank to do 200 miles, which would tie up with Yamaha's figures. What did we get fuel-wise? I think we were getting about 47.3 miles per gallon. Which is pretty good. It's a ways off what Yamaha claim. They're sort of 60 miles per gallon odd, but it's certainly not disastrous. And we haven't been hanging around. There's been a lot of that off-road is in second, third gear. So yeah, big tank is definitely a bonus from the road point of view in terms of your riding. And actually, to be honest, the extra mass of the bike kind of makes it feel a bit more settled on the road as well. This extra flare of the tank is kind of appreciated. It gives the bike more mass. I think the seat's comfier. Hard to tell in isolation, but it's certainly, I appreciate the fact that it's flatter up here. There's more room to move around. It doesn't sort of fix you in one place quite as much. And it kind of feels like it's a different material. It feels, I don't know, it feels kind of stiffer, but it's good. It supports both cheeks. So I think the seat is comfier. So, and also these pegs being sort of much wider. I don't know if they're off a WR450, but I don't think they are, but they look huge, but they're good for planting your feet on off-road, so that's a bonus. And yeah, and then you've got the menus. Well, you like them or you don't like them, and most people will probably stick it in one kind of style and go with that. It's not particularly offensive. I kind of keep wanting to unplug it because it looks like it's a phone. And sort of, when you get off the bike, you're thinking, oh, I should take my phone with me, and it sort of sits there. I don't know. I think I prefer the old LED system, but anyways, wind protection, to be honest, although the screen I think is the same height and the same size, it feels like you get more wind protection just because of this tank. You kind of somehow sit in the bike a bit more, so that's an improvement. I haven't dropped it, so I can't comment on bending the exhaust. I'm assuming if you dump it on this side, it'll still nick the swing arm, because we have seen one bike that's already done that. There's something else some other points I was going to make. I think the big problem for me is that it's not a problem, it's just that this bike is not in the same market as the standard Ténéré 700. Its price and its spec and its weight have kind of moved it roadward, and they've kind of moved it upper class slightly. The fact that it's £11,800 and the fact that the original Ténéré was 8,300, and if you bought one of those, 3 years ago, you bought your Ténéré 700 from, and I think you could get them for £8,000 if you were lucky. That's still in your head 3 years later. Oh, Ténéré's worth £8,000. I think I'll buy a World Raid. How much? 11.8. You know, that's like 40% more. It's a big step to make. And I'm not sure if sort of Ténéré owners are going to be up for that, because they love their bikes. They've modified them to heck. They've got kind of stuff. In fact, I've got some quotes from some BikeSocial members who've written to us. Excuse the glasses, getting on a bit. So Stephen Place says, I ordered a WR World Raid, then bought a stock bike and decided to upgrade the suspension with stiffer K-Tech springs and revalve, a USB socket, tubeless wheels, a Scorpion exhaust. Stephen loves the thought of a bigger tank, but it sounds like he's kind of spec'd his standard bike up to World Raid spec almost. Brian Hill, he loves his T7 with an Explore pack, doesn't need any of the features of the World Raid. His only wish is for it to be lighter with a lower seat height without losing ground clearance. Well, I'm sorry, Brian, your wish has not been met, because it's heavier and it has got more ground clearance, but it has got a taller seat height as well. Julian Lockwood has a T7 Rally Edition, added WR450 pegs, there you go, engine bars, and he loves it as it is. It's a common story with Ténéré owners. They make their specific mods and then they just like the bike as it is. Chris Witham thinks the World Raid will appeal to different riders than the T7. Chris, you're absolutely right, it will. He doesn't want the extra weight of the big tank, and the biggest shame is not sorting the exhaust mounting so dropping the bike doesn't damage the frame or swing arm. That is a familiar story, Chris. On Chris's bike, he's added a stiffer rear spring, a Camel ADV exhaust mount, which I think pushes the silencer further away from the swing arm, tucks it up under here. There you go, and the exhaust mounting, so dropping the bike doesn't damage the frame or swing arm. What else? John Graham has also fitted a high-level exhaust with a Hussar kit, stiffer rear spring from Rally Raid, and has a Camel auxiliary tank. Gets an extra 70 miles, and it sits at the back of the bike without raising the centre of gravity. And he says, the standard exhaust is stupid. I've seen the damage it can cause to both the frame and swing arm if the bike only gently falls on that side. Both Hussar and Camel show that there's plenty of space to move the silencer out of harm's way. Oh yes, and John Graham also says that what he wanted Yamaha to do was move the exhaust system. No, not fit a colour TFT screen. Sorry, they're difficult to see, he says, in strong sun, and I personally find them irritating and a distraction at night. And he wanted them to concentrate on reducing weight. So yes, thank you very much, John. They've done none of those things. So there we are. I think the bike is definitely not aimed at Ténéré 700 owners. It's definitely aimed at a slightly different customer, slightly more road orientated. I really like it, but it does make me give pause to think that it's £11,800 and a Tiger 900 Rally with its T-plane crank and its 88cc motor and its 100 horsepower, its longer travel shower suspension and its cruise control and its heated grips and its better spec is only £300 more. If you want a World Raid, then obviously you're not going to get a Triumph Tiger. But if you are making the choice between the two, it's kind of hard to make that call. So, but that's not to castigate the World Raid. It is a good bike. It's still got that fantastic engine, which is great fun. The chassis is still balanced. It still works the way it should. Nothing gets in the way. I like the longer tank range. Personally, if I was going to buy a Ténéré, I would buy this one because I like tank ranges. I've got a thing for them. I like the fact that I can do 200 plus miles without having to stop and fill up. I like the fact that it's got a USB port. I like the fact that it hasn't changed the bar, the little for putting my sat nav on here. I like the fact that it's still kind of fairly lightweight. It's still more, I don't know if it's easier to manage than a Tiger off-road, because they are really, the rallies are really useful off-road. And there isn't just the rally, there's the 890 Adventure R. That's only 600 quid more than this. Again, really handy off-road if you can get past the challenging styling and if you can get past the potential for a few niggly faults here and there. A few owners have complained. Certainly I don't think you'll get any problems with the Yamaha. These things have been bulletproof. The motor is just will run forever. So there we go. That's my sort of real quick overview of the Yamaha Ténéré 700 World Raid. If you want to know more and you've got more questions, stick them in the comments below and I will be along to answer them. And check out the written review, which will probably have a slightly more considered verdict on BikeSocial.co.uk. And thank you very much for watching. problem?
No, just knackered. You have to stop for a minute, dude.
Whew. I am f***ed.